Hey guys, I am Dr. Kim Sage. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and today I am going to be talking to you a bit about one of my very big passions, not just baking and eating sweets while I'm doing it, but this concept of attachment and attachment theory and why it is so important. There's a lot of videos out there, a lot of good ones, but I'm really pulling from the research. I'm going to go deeply into each style more and more to help you fully understand yourself. And so oftentimes in therapy, when I mention, let's say, well, what do you know about attachment theory? People have some idea or a lot of ideas, but oftentimes it's still this sort of like, okay, but what does that really mean? And how does that manifest and show up in my relationships? And so I like to start with talking about the mothering styles, or historically the caregiving styles, which have been mothers, especially in terms of research. So the primary caregiver. What happens in a childhood that then sets us up to make certain choices in life, especially in terms of how we see ourselves, how we regulate or don't regulate our bodies so well. You know, are we hypervigilant? Are we always on guard? Do we tend to numb out and isolate and push people away? This is all really connected to our childhood and our attachment system. Now, it is not about blaming parents, although I know, especially if you're new to therapy, it can feel that way. But I really see it as sort of an unpacking. It's actually kind of like a recipe. We have to not just start with the end, you know, the creation. We have to go back and say, okay, well, what are all the things that went into it? And so that is what we're going to just kind of go through today, and I will go through in more detail on attachment styles and always be relating it back to your childhood, especially if you had a more, I would say, difficult childhood, but even if you didn't, maybe your partner did. So it's really helpful to understand about them. Now, if you are new here, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell, and that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. I'm gonna try, I keep saying, to post more often. I do post pretty much every day on TikTok, but I would like to find some short form videos. As you guys know, I keep saying I am finishing the filming of the videos for the course I've created. Actually, 2 courses to start with. One is free and one will be a more in-depth kind of flagship course on healing and dealing from the trauma of borderline and narcissistic parents. And so I hope you will check those out if they apply to you and your story. Okay, so as I talk today about attachment, I'm just going to start making my chocolate clouds from this cookbook, which I absolutely love. It's just called meringue. And what's nice is if you have a gluten issue or you just want to avoid gluten, not looking to get into that whole debate, but as someone who has pretty significant autoimmune disease, and my daughter does pretty significantly, which I think for frankly both of us in different ways in part tie back to our childhoods and trauma, medical trauma for my daughter. It's hard. It's hard to make videos and feel good and do all these things. That's also why I struggle sometimes, to be honest, with working a full caseload and doing all of this. So I hope you guys will be patient with me and know that I am truly working nonstop to share this content. And I really do want to share it. I'm so excited for you to be with me on this journey. So thank you so much to everyone who subscribed and follows me. I really appreciate you. Okay, let's get into it. So basically, this recipe just calls for egg whites, cream of tartar, superfine sugar, which is basically just like very, very thin, fine sugar, unsweetened cocoa powder, vanilla extract, and I use dark chocolate chips. And I'm also going to throw in some coconut because I like the combo of coconut and chocolate, but you can do whatever you want. I'll post the recipe as well down below the video. Okay, so when people come to see me, I'm just gonna start talking like I would if we were hanging out and you came to my house and we were having a cup of tea or a glass of wine or chit-chatting, because the truth is most of my friends could give a crap about therapy concepts, but I'd like to talk to you as if we were just kind of hanging out and I was explaining it to you, okay? So I have to start with separating my egg whites, so I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna start doing things. I'll cut in some video of what I'm doing, but I just wanna keep going and talking, so I'm not gonna get too far into the step-by-step but I hope you will enjoy this process as I do, because I feel like it's the best way for me to just be me. Okay, so when people come to therapy, they're basically often trying to understand two things, usually. One is, do they have mental health issues, and sort of what are those about? And that's about 50% of people. And then I would say, I'm gonna toss my eggs in the sink, the other 50% are coming in because they have some kind of relationship issue, right? And so that's the thing, right? No matter what's happening, even if we have, you know, mental health issues like anxiety or depression, we still have to show up in relationship to ourselves and other people. By the way, egg whites at room temperature is the first thing you want to do. And there are 3 egg whites, okay? So we come into therapy and we start to talk about our relationships and ourselves. And I've said this to a lot of patients, and I'm not sure any of my patients watch my channel, but if they did, they would be like, yeah, we've heard that, Kim. Is that oftentimes people will come in and they'll be super depressed or anxious, and I will say, okay, you know, I'm assessing things. Tell me about, you know, how's your relationship? And they'll be like, fine, my marriage is great. There are no issues there. And I promise you, somewhere between, you know, 3 to 6 months in, there's a lot going on in the relationship. Because the truth is, I think outside of our, you know, own physical well-being, nothing impacts our joy, our happiness, or our anxiety or sadness more than our primary relationships, especially the people that we live with. And so it makes a big difference, right, if that's not going well. But I think it's really hard sometimes, I'm putting the egg whites in this mixing bowl, to really see that. And so that becomes another part of our focus, because it's all connected. So the quality of your relationships is really impacted by the way you expect relationships to be. The internalized map, which is really the heart of attachment theory, the map that you developed long before you were even able to be verbal, right? What does love look like? What does caregiving look like? And really responsiveness. That is the core of attachment theory. What was the responsiveness of the caregiver? In other words, did they know the difference between a wet diaper cry and a hungry cry and I'm just a fussy, I need to attach cry? That attunement between infant and caregiver sets the stage for how we believe relationships work. Now, it's not just infancy, although that's the first part, because let's say you had a great healthy caregiver and then they passed, or there was a divorce, right? And there was a separation. So along the way, we have to also make adjustments. And attachment theory really does, you know, initially talk about those early years. But the truth is we have a lot of different attachment relationships. So we're starting with that main one, and that's where I think it matters. But it's important to know that I think, and many others believe, that attachment has sort of your main style, and then you can lean into other styles based on the relationship. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if I'm a mostly secure person and I somehow find a partner who is, let's say, secure but kind of leans into anxious or leans into avoidant, that is going to trigger a certain response in me. It might even make me, let's say if we're, you know, if I'm a little avoidant and you're avoidant, whoever is being the most avoidant will create anxiety, more anxious attachment in the other partner. And so it really is this sort of, you know, reciprocal dynamic that affects attachment. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go mix this in the mixer and create a little bit of egg white situation here, and then we will keep talking about attachment theory. And really quickly, I'm adding 1/8 of a teaspoon of cream of tartar. I found these on Amazon, you guys. They're so amazing. They have magnets in them. So anyway, I'm going to mix 1/8 of cream of tartar with the egg whites and kind of get some peaks going there, and then we'll keep going. So now we're back with our peaks. Here you can see our meringue, and I'm just going to add the vanilla, the chocolate chips, and the cocoa powder and a little coconut, and pop them in the oven for 90 minutes, and then turn the oven off and let them sit for another hour or so. That is really how you get that chewy, crispy meringue texture that's so delicious. But let's get back to talking about attachment. Now, the truth is that most of you who watch these videos know a lot about attachment. I'm going to just drop this in the sink. And it's really nothing that you're, like don't know about. But what's important to understand is the caregiving, the quality of responsiveness or not, really how that played out. That is what creates these styles at the core. And the difficulty is the words like avoidant, dismissing, and things like that. If someone comes into my office and if I said, oh, do you have an avoidant, dismissing style? I bet you they would be like, no. And I say, okay, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that to be honest, but I said, okay. If I said, tell me about your childhood, they would not define it as avoidant. They often might say, it was a fine childhood. My parents were fine, not a lot of fighting or yelling. They're still married, things like that. But when we go deeper into it and I say, okay, well, can you give me some adjectives to describe, kind of like that childhood? If they said something, let's say like loving, and I said, okay, I would say, okay, can you give me an example of that? They often don't have any. And so there's a lot of issues and also research for avoidance, as an example, and around memories, which is a whole different video. But the bottom line is that it's hard for us to fully understand, and I think these words sometimes are confusing. So here's the bottom line. I want you to end this video understanding. Like I said, we're going to go deeper into it. The four main styles really do have their main sort of like system of living inside you as a map, but you can lean into other styles, as I said. And so the core of each of them is this. When we look at a secure attachment parenting style, what is that? It means that the parents were generally, not perfectly, responsive to the child's attachment related needs. And what are those? Basically, it's like how they show up in caregiving, right? They were pretty much available. They weren't lost in their own traumas. They weren't, consistently unavailable for long periods of time. They didn't actively shut down emotion as other styles do. And so a secure dynamic is really at the core, that the parents were generally consistent and responsive. Now, what does it look like to have a more anxious style? I'm going to add vanilla here. Let's see, half a teaspoon. So a more anxious style means that the parents were inconsistent. They were sometimes there, sometimes not there. And that could be related to work issues. It could be related to just their own mood. We see higher anxiety in general in these parents. These parents often understand fear really well, so they're really good at like, oh, don't do this, don't do that. But then that often creates a connection over anxiety and fear in the child. And these parents often could be sort of needy and dependent and create that dynamic in their children. And so an anxious style is really manifest as an adult where you want to be with people, you feel this need and drive so much for connection, but oftentimes you lose yourself. You can get lost in your past traumas and wounds and hurts. You're sort of overly hypervigilant about being left or abandoned or not wanted. And so you're always reading the relationship to an extreme level. You're sort of like scanning at all times, like what is the nature of the relationship? What is the health of the relationship? And, that can be really exhausting, not just for you, but for your partner. Now, looking at avoidant styles here, we see these words called repeated maternal rejection. And so, like I said, most avoidance would be like, well, I wasn't rejected. But what we're saying here is that the child's attempts to get their attachment needs met, meaning reaching out in emotional ways or even physical ways, were often shut down by the parent. These parents aren't often as comfortable with physical intimacy and hugging and closeness. And so at the core, they might also reward things like performance, and they might actively shut down crying and anger, but reward the child. Oh, look how good Kim is. She can play alone in her room for hours. It's like, yeah, because you're not going to be there for me. And so the child has to deactivate their needs, and that need they have gets perceived by the child as rejection. And so these people become little adults, or little people who become big adults, who basically have learned that autonomy and being pseudo-independent is the key to being physically safe. It's how they regulate it. And so they can seem warm and engaging, especially in the beginning, but at the core, it's like, but don't get too close. There's almost like I don't necessarily feel like I can be safe fully being myself and leaning into you because I never had that. The next one is a more disorganized style. And this style was discovered in later years after the first three styles for the kids who could not be classified in the research. And that is the strange situation I'm going to refer to in a second really quickly. And that's really how we begin to understand these styles. But basically, these were kids who didn't have a specific pattern of behavior. Now, there's been some belief that, no, there is an organization to the chaos, but the bottom line is that their parents were often, this would be parents who probably were more borderline, who had more severe mental health issues, who had more personality disorders, who were hard to be consistent. They really struggled with consistency. And so the child has to always sort of figure out their needs on their own. It's very chaotic. It's hard to know what you need. And I think where it shows up, unless you have your own severe mental health issues, is that when we have this, and this is what I would say kind of happens for me, is that I can be anxious and super avoidant, right? It's like in relationships. I'm very independent and autonomous, let's say, for example. But when I get in a relationship, it can make me kind of freaked out and terrified what is going to happen next. And so I can panic. And so that's what it looks like, right? And the core of these styles, as I said, in the strange situation, really came from looking at interactions between mothers and babies, especially because of the time frame we looked at mothers, and observing them when a stranger entered a research room. And the bottom line is that the babies had different responses. Babies who were anxious never were fully exploratory and as independent in the room. And when the stranger came in and then mom left, they were left alone with the stranger. They became even clingier. The babies who were avoidant had already learned to kind of shut down their needs. And so when mom left the room, they might watch her with their eyes, but they had already kind of learned to internalize that they were okay. But side note, when we looked at their internal measurements, like their heart rate and things like that, they were just as upset behind the face that seemed fine with her leading, but inside they were freaking out. We seem cool, like a cucumber, but we're freaking out sometimes inside. We long for closeness, but we're sort of scared of that. And then secure babies kind of handled it. They cried, but they went back to exploring the room. And disorganized babies were sort of really hard to put in a category. You know, they were upset, they were fearful, they were shut down, they would go up to strangers, and the stranger and seek, you know, support from them in a way that most babies would not. So the bottom line is that these early experiences really do impact how we expect others to be in relationship. And so we're going to talk more and more about these styles and how they show up in your specific relationships and behaviors. But what I really want you to know is that understanding your attachment is the key to understanding so much about yourself and to understanding your healing. Because a lot of research shows, for example, that, let's say in disorganized attachment, where there's potentially a lot of trauma, right? If the parents are chaotic and in their own trauma, the children might have this, is that going straight to trauma processing can make these kids even more dysregulated. And so some research shows that actually complex trauma, for example, this relational trauma, isn't about the trauma as much as it is about starting out with a disorganized attachment style and then having later childhood events make that worse, right? More abuse, more lack of predictability, extreme experiences. And so I think it's important to understand that that is the root of what we're talking about here. So I will come back and share more, but I am so glad that you guys visited me today in my kitchen, and I will look forward to sharing my chocolate pillows or clouds, whatever they're called when they're done. But thanks again for watching. Please stay safe and well, and let's talk more about attachment. I really believe it is the heart of understanding how to heal our stories and our wounds. And I'll see you next time. Bye guys, and take care.